resume record. And I'm going to let people in, and then I'll hand it over to you.
Sure.
Hi, everybody. Welcome. Thanks so much for coming. Still a couple of people joining us. Welcome to this great presentation. We're really looking forward to it. Carol, thank you so much for coming. Episode 9, Grow Healthy Easy Care Roses, part of our 2021 Master Gardener Continuing Education Series. I'm going to hand it over to Carol. Carol, if you want to introduce yourself before we get started, we'd love to hear a little bit about your background. If anybody has any questions during the presentation, please type them into the chat box and we'll have some time at the end for Carol to get to your questions. So I'm going to stop sharing, and Carol, over to you.
Hello, everyone. It's nice to see you this evening. My name is Carol Edwards, and I'm a DC Master Gardener. I went through the Master Gardener class many years ago, and since then have worked in various gardens, public gardens around DC. And I have an interest in roses that is long-term. I first started cultivating roses back when I lived in Atlanta, Georgia. That was my first house, and I had a bit of a garden and garden space and started planting some roses. That's when the David Austin roses were first coming out, and I was very excited that there were some new roses on the market that bloomed more than once a year, but looked like the old-fashioned traditional roses. And so I started off by getting a few of the David Austin roses. I was lucky to have a neighbor who knew quite a bit about roses and loved old garden roses, and he became my mentor. And so I learned more and more about roses at that time. Then when I moved and settled here in Washington, DC, although I have a very small garden, I have packed that garden full of roses. And in the presentation tonight, I'm going to show you some of the roses in my garden in the slides that we're going to see. And of course, one big reason that I hear quite often about why people don't grow roses is that they take a lot of care, and people today in their busy lives just don't have the time to care for the roses. So I'm going to show you that roses can be no more time consuming than other plants in a well-maintained garden. And it's a matter of choosing the right roses. So if you choose the right roses, they are easy care. So I'm now going to bring up the presentation on the screen. If I can ask to share the screen, let's see.
Carol, I made you co-host, so you should be able to share.
Okay, let me see how I do that. Okay, share screen. Here we go. Okay. Okay, can everybody see my screen?
Yes.
Okay. So here, this is a picture of my small Capitol Hill garden here, but as you can see, it's full of roses. And so if you would like to grow roses, here are the must-haves. If you don't have these conditions, it will be very difficult and much more time-consuming to try to grow roses. 6 hours or more of direct sun, and the more sun that you have, the better. In my garden, I have an east-facing side to my garden, which gets 6 hours of more of direct sun a day. I have a north side of the garden, which does not get quite enough sun. I do try to grow a few roses, shade-tolerant roses, but there is all the difference in the world between the roses that get the adequate amount of sun and those that don't. So I would say if you have a shade garden, unfortunately, roses are not going to be for you. What you can try to do is to grow roses in pots and then move the pots around so that they get enough sun. Good soil is another must for growing roses. Roses like rich soil, and they like the soil to be well drained. Roses also like water. So this summer, for example, in July, we had a very dry July. And so I had to water frequently. August was just the opposite. We had lots of water in August, so I did not have to water so frequently. If you are busy, then you might want to consider having a watering system for your roses. And it should a drip irrigation would be the best, where it doesn't actually, the water doesn't actually splash up on the plants itself. It waters the ground and soaks into the soil. And finally, I say your gaze. So just like you go into and look at the plants in the rest of your garden, you need to do that for roses. And one nice thing about roses is that you can cut some of them and bring them into your home to have as cut flowers and good fragrant cut flowers that are beautiful for days on end. But getting out in the garden just to look at the roses and examine them every couple of days or every day is a good thing to do. You don't have to spend a lot of time doing it, but your gaze is definitely needed. That way you can stay on top of any kind of potential problems and nip them in the bud. So the secret of having easy care in your rose garden is to select the right roses. And there are sources for selecting the right roses. And by the right roses, I mean roses that are naturally disease resistant. And we do have a nice selection of disease resistant roses that are in the trade today. One source is the earth kind roses. Several years ago, the University of Texas A&M decided, along with horticulturalists, to identify roses that could thrive with very little care. So they enlisted the help of several rose gardens around the country, and ask them to plant roses and don't do anything to those roses but to water them from time to time if they need it. No, no chemicals of any kind, no fertilizer, just no pampering of any kind. And then after several years, I think the first trial lasted for about 8 years. They looked at the roses that were still in good condition and thriving. And they selected those roses to be the earth kind roses. And so there is a list of them. They are, if you Google earth kind roses, you can find them. If you go to Texas A&M University's website, there are a list of all the earth kind roses. Some of them are old garden roses. Some of them are relatively newly introduced roses, but they are all very hardy and will do well in our climate without much care. A second good source of disease-resistant roses are roses that were bred by the Cordes Rose Company. That is a company out of Germany. And many years ago, Germany began to require that that plants that were bred there be bred in conditions where pesticides were not used. So many years ago, Cordes started breeding roses that would do well without the use of pesticides. And so they are a good source currently of roses that thrive without pesticide use. And so look for those Cordes roses, and I will share with you some places where you can order roses from Cordes. Another source of roses that are disease resistant are those that were winners in the Biltmore International Rose Trials. From 2013 to 2020, Biltmore Estate in North Carolina turned over some of their gardens to trials of new roses. And what was very nice about their trials was that anybody could enter, excuse me, without having to pay a large fee. That meant amateur breeders as well as professional breeders that had roses that they felt should be admired in the trade could enter them into the Biltmore trials. And what would happen was that those trials lasted 3 years. And over the 3 years, the roses that were in the trials, again, they got watered, but no pesticides were given to those roses, and also no fertilizer were given to the roses. And then they had a panel of judges that would look at the roses and examine them and rate them for health 4 times a year. And one of those trials, they invited in a large panel of judges from the United States and also from other nations. And the roses were rated by these reviewers. And at the end of the 3 years, the roses that got the most high ratings were declared the winners of the trials. Probably because of COVID, Biltmore decided that they could no longer sustain the trials. So we no longer have them. But again, you can go online and Google the Biltmore International Rose Trial winners, and you will see those roses that won awards in each of those years between 2013 and 2020. One of the awards that was given, the Lord Burleigh Award for most disease resistant, was the most disease resistant from among all of the roses that won awards in the trial. So if you want to choose a rose that is truly the most of the disease resistant among the winners in the Biltmore trials, look for the roses that won the Lord Burleigh Award. Currently, there are the American Rose Trials for Sustainability being conducted. And those rose trials, again, are attempting to identify the most disease-resistant roses. And they have several sites at which the rose trials are being conducted. One of the complaints in the past about rose trials is that mostly they've been conducted in warm weather places. So the mid-Atlantic or in the South. So people that are in the Northeast, for example, people living in Michigan or living in Maine, said, well, can we really trust the awards given that these roses will work for us in our climates? So the American Rose Trials for Sustainability is trying to answer that concern by having trial gardens in all different climates, including some of our colder climates in the Northeast and the Midwest. Again, you can go to their website and look at some of their roses that are have been designated as sustainable roses. This is a fairly new set of trials, so they are currently in the midst of trialing roses, and but they do have some recommendations of their disease-resistant roses. So if you're not growing disease-resistant roses now, my recommendation to you is, if you have no roses in your garden and you're just starting out, look first for some of the disease-resistant roses at these resources that I've mentioned. And if you already have roses that you are growing that are not disease-resistant, think about replacing them with roses from one of these sources. Now, I'm not going to talk a lot about the diseases that roses can get, but I would be remiss not to talk about one of those diseases, and that's rose rosette disease. Rose rosette disease is, although it is not a brand new disease, it's been rampant in the last few years. It has taken off and it's become a big problem. And it is a problem in the Washington, D.C. area. If you see the photograph of the rose on the left-hand side, you can see that the growth on that rose does not look like normal growth. It's what we call a witch's broom. And you can see that it is very, very thorny. And in fact, it will be thornier than the rest of the rose. And it's also, the new growth tends to be red. Now, some roses have new growth that tends to be red normally. So just because you see that the new growth on your rose is red does not mean that it has rosette disease. But if you have a cluster of growth that looks like this, a very bushy, thorny, this witch's broom type of characteristic, that is a indication that you may have rosette disease. It is carried by an eriophyte mite, which means a mite that travels on the wind. And it is the mite that infects the roses. That mite, it is unfortunately all over Washington, D.C. It seems that the host of the mite is a rose called multiflora rose. And just like kudzu, it was one of those plants that was widely introduced in the United States to try to remedy other problems, and then turned out, unfortunately, to be a problem itself. So I would say to look in your garden at your roses to make sure that they do not have rosette disease. Also to look around the neighborhood so that you can see whether or not your neighbors have roses with rosette disease. If you are going to work in other public gardens and community gardens around the city, and you see roses about, look at them to see whether or not they have rosette disease. The problem is that there is no cure for rosette disease, unfortunately. If your rose has that disease, it will die eventually. And the mites will blow on the wind and infect other roses that are near the rose that is diseased. That's why it's so important to get rid of the infected plant. And the way I remove infective plants is I take a big plastic bag, put it over the plant, cut the plant at its base at ground level inside that bag. Then I dig out the roots and add them to the bag. I do not compost the rose, the infected rose, it just gets thrown away. So that's unfortunately where we are with rosette. There are scientists that are working to try to find some sort of treatment or cure for it, but we don't have it yet. And like I say, you can't just cut off the branch. You've got to go to getting rid of the entire rose because there is no cure. And if the mites go to another rose, then that rose will become infected and the disease will just spread from there. So here are some easy care roses that are suited for our Washington, D.C. area. And you can see here are some roses from my garden. And so here's the first. I'm going to start with climbers. And if you are interested in a climbing rose, Zephirine Drouhin is a wonderful climber, has beautiful pink flowers on it. It does not have very many thorns, and it is a fragrant rose. So this is a great rose. It's an older rose and a Bourbon rose, a beautiful climber that can be controlled. So I highly recommend Zephirine Drouhin. If you want a very vigorous climbing rose, then you cannot do better than Peggy Martin. And Peggy Martin would almost be a rambler. However, it does not have stiff canes. So as you can see on the left here, it will branch and flow over down to the ground. So it does need to be pegged up. However, it is very vigorous and will grow prolifically. The story of Peggy Martin is that during Katrina, many gardens in Louisiana were just pummeled with rain for days and days and days. And so a garden in Louisiana, a gardener went out, and this was after finally the storm was over and things were draining, and there was Peggy Martin still intact, the only rose intact. And so Peggy Martin, it was a survivor of Katrina. And so it then became very famous for having survived those harsh conditions. The nursery trade then said, okay, well, this is a rose we can take and grow and sell. So Peggy Martin has become a rose for people that want a vigorous climbing rose that is very hardy and healthy and foolproof. It has smaller flowers on it. The flowers are smaller than Zephirine Drouhin, but as you can see, they're prolific flowers. So if you want a very, what would be akin to a rambling rose that would grow and just grow and grow and bloom, Peggy Martin is the rose for you. Lady of Shallot is one of the David Austin roses, and you may know the name David Austin. He started breeding roses in England, his home country. He loved the old-fashioned roses, and he loved the fragrant roses. He just wanted roses that would bloom more than one time a year. So he started working on that in the 1960s, actually, was when he first got started. And over his lifetime, he lived to be almost 90 years old. He bred lots and lots of beautiful roses with the old-fashioned look of roses, with fragrance, but roses that would continuously, that would bloom more than once a year, that what we call reblooming or remounted roses. Lady of Shallot is a beautiful apricot shrub rose that grows to be about 5.5 feet tall, with beautiful green foliage, and has many, many lovely apricot flowers on it. So I highly recommend Lady of Shallot if you like this color. Another wonderful rose that blooms frequently and reblooms is called Beverly. This is one of the Cortez roses. It is a hybrid tea, and the hybrid tea roses are the roses when you go to buy roses for Valentine's Day and you have one large bloom on a long stalk. That's a characteristic of hybrid tea roses. So Beverly is one of those hybrid tea roses. Generally grows on a single stalk, so it's good for cutting and bringing into the house. It's very fragrant and it is very disease resistant. Bordeaux Citiscape is a red rose. This is a Floribunda. So there will be several different roses growing at the end of each branch. That's the characteristic of Floribunda roses. They are smaller roses generally than the hybrid teas. But one of the characteristics of Floribundas, some of the hybrid tea roses in particular, sort of shut down during the heat of the summer and go a bit dormant, but then they pick up when the weather cools off in the early fall. So they have a vigorous blooming season in the spring, a vigorous blooming season in the fall, but more intermittent in the summer. Floribunda roses, however, tend to bloom more in the summer as well as the spring and fall. And Bordeaux Citiscape is one of those roses that blooms frequently. So again, if you're interested in a red rose that is a good disease-resistant rose for our climate, I highly recommend Bordeaux Citiscape, a Cortez rose. Plum Perfect is another Floribunda, beautiful color. Unfortunately, the one downside to me for Plum Perfect is that it doesn't have much of a fragrance. But the beauty of the rose, this purple, vibrant purple, makes up for the fact that it doesn't have much of a fragrance. It's a showstopper, and again, nice, easy care rose. This is one of the Cortez family of roses, and I highly recommend Plum Perfect to you. Ducher is a hardy rose, blooms continuously, even through the summer. This is a tea rose, so it's an old rose from the 1800s. It has white flowers, prolific bloomer all season long. It has fragrance to it, and again, the flowers are smaller. They're not the big humongous, but you'll have many, many flowers on your Ducher. And this is, I think, one of the best of the roses that were from the drawing a blank here, from the Texas A&M group of trials. So I would definitely recommend this rose for those people who say, I just really don't have time to give to roses at all. If you plant Ducher, Ducher is pretty much planted and forget it rose. And then if you're interested in a yellow rose, yellow is tough because so many of the yellow roses start off with vibrant color, but then they fade and become more cream color. And that I would say that that's almost all of the disease-resistant yellow roses that I know of. They start off pronounced yellow, but many of them will fade. Moonlight Romantica starts off a bit lighter, and so it doesn't fade as much because it is a light yellow rose. It's a beautiful hybrid tea. It's fragrant, and this was one of the winners from the Biltmore Trials. So if you're interested in a yellow rose, I would definitely check out Moonlight Romantica. And then the next rose that I'm going to show, which I'm going to move to where you get the roses now, but it's called Sunny Sundays, the rose on the left, and that's a Cortez rose. It's a yellow rose too. So if you're interested in yellow roses, I would try one of these two, Sunny I'm mixing up the name of this rose with another rose called Sunny Sundays, but this is not Sunny Sundays. But it is Sunny Skies, I believe, is the name of this rose, and also the Moonlight Romantica. So those are choices for yellow roses. So now, where can you find these disease-resistant roses? Locally, you may be able to find some of these roses in the early spring. By that I mean early April to late April to early May, or maybe mid-April now. And you could find them in Home Depot and Lowe's sometimes. You might also find that some of our larger local nurseries, like Homestead Garden and Merrifield Garden Center, and the garden center that's out in Bethesda, and I'm blanking on the name of it now. It'll come to me. But those nurseries carry some of the David Austin roses and sometimes some of the Cortez roses. The most foolproof way to get the rose that you want, and the roses that I've named for you tonight, is by mail ordering the roses. And you can mail order the roses from various sources. I've put some here that are mail order sources that I find to be reliable and to have a nice large selection of these roses that I've shown you tonight. David Austin, they sell their own roses. So if you Google David Austin and go on their site, you can order roses directly from them. Chambly's Rose Nursery is in Texas, located in Texas, and they will send roses mail order. they carry a good selection of the Cortez roses. So I would try them, try Chambly for the Cortez roses. Palatine roses is actually located in Canada, and they have an excellent selection of the Cortez roses and not the David Austin roses, but the Cortez roses, the old garden roses. I should also say that for the Texas roses, the earth kind roses, that Chambly carries the earth kind roses as well. Palatine may carry a few of the earth kind roses, but they really carry a large selection of the Cortez roses. So the thing about the Chambly, the Palatine nursery, is that they breed their roses on multiflora rose stock. So they are not on their own root. There are advantages and disadvantages to having roses on their own root. Oftentimes, roses that are on their own roots, as opposed to being grafted onto a more vigorous rootstock, take a long time to get established. They may take 3-4 years to get well established. Whereas the roses that are grafted onto another rootstock will grow faster. And that's why Palatine will graft their roses. The other thing is that since Palatine is in Canada and they need their roses that are distributed locally to stand up to the cold Canadian winters, the multiflora rose stock is one that can take the cold weather better than some of the other rose stocks, and certainly better than roses on their own root. So if you order from Palatine, you will get roses on multiflora stock. I've never had a problem with it. So I would highly recommend roses from the Palatine Rose Nursery. The Antique Rose Emporium carries roses like Zephirine Drouhin that I showed you earlier, and Peggy Martin. And they also carry a selection of a small selection of roses that they have bred that are disease resistant, that I haven't talked about tonight, like Belinda's Dream. That's the name of one shrub rose that's pink and very disease resistant in our area. And Antique Rose Emporium out of Texas carries that rose. And finally, heirloom roses. They're a little bit more expensive, but they carry the roses from the palette, from some roses from David Austin, but the Cortez roses, they have a nice selection of the Cortez roses. So if you are looking for any of these roses, mail order is a good way of getting them. Palatine has a season that they actually restock their roses and put them out for the new season. This year, I understand it's going to be in early December that they will do it. Usually it's in September, but this year it'll be early December. And because they are a very popular mail order resource, they sell out quickly of the roses that they have in stock. So I would begin in now to start looking at some of these mail order sites to see if they have the roses you want in stock. If they have not yet restocked, which I don't think Chambly has restocked yet. Palatine, I know, has not yet restocked. I'm not sure about Antique Rose Emporium. David Austin has a good supply of their roses right now. Heirloom Roses hasn't quite restocked. So those places I would say would be to start looking now and to continue to go back to those websites to check periodically every week or two to see if they have restocked their roses and you can find the rose you want. Some of these sites, like Heirloom, you can actually sign up to be notified when the rose comes into stock. If it's not in stock in the nursery, they will send you an email when the rose comes in stock and you can order it at that point in time. So there's more information about mail ordering roses that we have, and by that I'm saying the Potomac Rose Society, which is a local rose group here in the metropolitan area. And we did a presentation on mail ordering roses. And if you join the Potomac Rose Society, you can go to the section of the website for members, and it has lots of information about where to mail order various roses. I would say for those of you who want to have disease-resistant roses that can give you success with your roses and easy care, keep your disease-resistant roses and replace your others with disease-resistant roses. When you plant your new disease-resistant roses, give them a chance to adapt to and adjust to local conditions. So they may get a few bugs on them at first, but as they adapt to the local situation, that should cease to be a problem. Again, walk out in your garden, take a look at your roses every couple of days. And that way, if you begin to see a problem with your rose, you can get on it early and treat it early and avoid problems. And in general, make sure to water your roses, give them enough water. You can fertilize your roses once or twice a year. That helps because roses are heavy feeders. I use the natural fertilizers, not chemical fertilizers. And then think about Marie Kondo's advice to us about our homes. It applies to roses too. Does this rose bring me abundant joy? If the rose starts to be a problem for you and it's no longer bringing you abundant joy, you're finding problems with it, then shovel prune that rose and replace it with another one that can bring you abundant joy. So I just recommended to you, if you're really interested in roses and want to know more, the Potomac Rose Society, and there's our web address, potomacrose.org. That is our local area Rose Society, and think about joining, or at least go to the website and check out information there. With that, I will end my presentation and ask for questions.
Wow, Carol, that was wonderful. Thank you so much. There are a few questions already in the chat box. Would you like me to read them out to you?
Yes, that would be great.
Okay, well, Anna asked, do these roses have a scent or rose smell? Or I think it was probably directed to a specific photo that you were showing, but maybe you could talk a little bit about which of these roses have your favorite perfume.
Beverly, the pink rose that I showed you, has a lovely fragrance to it. And so I would definitely recommend that for fragrance. Let me see which other ones. A Moonlight Romantica has a fragrance to it. Let's see which others of these have Zephirine Drouhin, the climber that I showed you, has a wonderful fragrance to it. So yes, and if you go to the websites of say David Austin, for example, and look up the David Austin roses, they will say whether or not they have a fragrance. And so will some of the other websites that I recommended to you. They will rate the fragrance. Now, I have to say, I would take the rating with a little bit of a grain of salt. So if they say, unless they say extremely fragrant, or if they have stars and they have 5 stars for the fragrance, I would say it may have less fragrance than you think, because the fact of the matter is these are companies trying to sell you roses. So they want to put the roses in the best light possible. So they may not have as much of a fragrance as they say. There is a website called Help Me Find Roses, and that's an independent website that you can go to, and they rate roses, and they will also mention whether the rose is fragrant or not. But that is a good site to get general information about any particular rose that you would like to know about. So if you have the name of the rose, you just go to Help Me Find Roses, and then put in the name of the rose in the search field. And if it is in their database, and believe me, many, many roses are in their database, then that information will come up.
Wonderful, thank you. Another question is, how do you counter if your soil has clay? Would just fertilizing it work?
I put leaf grow or some other soil amendment on my soil twice a year. And so what you want to do is to build up the quality of your soil slowly. So first, before you plant your rose, when you are digging your hole for your rose, that's a time where you put amendments into the hole, and you would amend your clay soil. And you might amend the soil not only with fertilizer and with some sort of soil conditioner, but you might put in a little bit of permatil, which is a kind of exploded slate that if you for drainage that will excuse me, that will improve the drainage of the soil. So I would put in a little bit of the permatil into the hole. Permatil is a brand name, but if you go to a nursery and ask for permatil, they'll know what you're talking about, and you can find a bag, and you can use that to amend your planting hole. So, and then each year, that if you put a little bit of leaf grow or some other kind of soil conditioner around on the ground around the hole, and then you're going to I mean around the rose, and then you're going to cover the rose with a very light layer of mulch as well, and the mulch breaks down over time. So all of that should improve the quality of the soil and amend the clay.
Okay, wonderful. A lot of people saying your presentation was amazing, but I'll get to the comments later. Somebody's asking, do you give them a hard prune at the end of the season, or what are your pruning techniques?
Okay, so the pruning is a whole nother subject that we could have a whole session just on pruning and how to prune. In the as it gets cold, the only thing that I do is prune it. Well, let's start with the basics. Anytime you find a dead branch, I don't care when it is, anytime you find a dead branch, prune it out. When you see branches that are crossing and rubbing against each other, prune one of them out. You don't want those crossing, rubbing branches, because eventually they're going to die. So you want to do that. In the fall, I'm thinking about winter, and I'm thinking about the worst possible winter we might have, which might be Snowmageddon, if any of you were around for that. And so what you want to do is just prune your rose enough so that you won't have real tall branches that might break off or might get sheared off in the wind. So I don't do heavy pruning in the fall. I just do light pruning to take the height of the branches down, that particularly if they're thin branches that might wave in the wind or get bent over with snow, should we have it, and break off. Then the time that I do the heavy pruning for the rose is in spring, when the forsythia bloom, which is generally in the middle of March. That is a time to prune your roses. There are some people that prune their roses a bit earlier than that time, and that's fine too. But definitely the old saying is, when the forsythia blooms, that's when you prune your roses. And the forsythia are the shrubs that have lots of little yellow flowers on them in about early to mid-March.
Okay, next wonderful. Question. We only have 1 minute left. So last question. Are you aware of any good basic rose care books? I have David Austin Roses. Any others to recommend?
You know, I should have been prepared for that. An Ortho company, I know, had a very basic rose care book years ago. I don't know whether it's still in print, but that was a good book on roses. For disease-resistant roses, let me recommend Peter Kolkowski's book on roses. He has a brand new book that I believe is called Roses. And he has another book that is on disease-resistant roses. And Patricia, I'll get you the names of those, the titles of those books, and you can pass it on to people who were a part of this seminar.
Thank you, Carol. That would be wonderful. And I'll also send you all of the lovely comments that you're getting in the chat box. Everyone's saying what a wonderful presentation, beautiful, a lot of great thank yous, and everyone's saying great things about you. So thank you so much for coming tonight, Carol. I'm so sorry we didn't get to all of the questions, everybody, but this was great. Carol, can I share your email with the group?
Yes, you can. Just please, people, give me time to answer if you have questions. Give me a little bit of time, because I'm not like one of the young kids that gets on and does the texting all the time. So, but I'll try to answer your questions.
All right. Well, thank you so much. That's very kind of you. Thank you, everybody, for coming tonight. I'm going to stop recording, and everybody have a